Creating interesting backgrounds for your collage work. There are many different ways that you can create a background using lots of different paints. You may like to use some acrylics and push them around on the page in an acrylic wash. You could even use tea, coffee and hot chocolate, or even beetroot juice if you don't have any paints. You can even create an interesting background by just using up torn pieces of paper. So for an acrylic wash, I've just put some water down onto my page and then I'm just adding some acrylic paint. The water is helping the paint to spread out on the page. I'm then just going to push the paint around the page in a completely random way. There's no real pattern to this. I'm just trying to add interesting areas of colour on the page. I'm going to add in some more colours. I'm going to start using some greens and blues because I want the colours to mix on the page for me, creating lots of different hues. I also like the fact that I can see the brush marks in the paint. This adds more interest to the background. I'm now also going to create some marks. I'm using a toilet roll. I'm sure we've all got those in lockdown. And I'm just pushing that into the paint just to add some texture and some patterns and some shapes. I'm now just going to add in some different colours. I'm adding a really nice vibrant pink. I just want to see what that does when I merge that and mix that into the other paints that are already on the page. You can see I'm going over some of my marks, that's fine. I want to just create some areas of interest, some little bits of pattern, some different colours, and actually I really like the brush strokes in this background, so I'm going to try and keep them visible as much as possible. Okay, so I used acrylic paints for my background, but any paints will do. Anything you might have to hand, give it a go, see what happens. Okay, so you may not have paints to hand, but there are many things you can use instead. So why not try tea, coffee, or even hot chocolate? Beetroot juice is also a really good substitute for paint, or even food colouring. So here I'm just building up areas of interest again using some tea. I'm going to introduce some hot chocolate, move it around the page and see what happens and see what sort of interesting background I can achieve. You can dab off some of the tea or hot chocolate that you've put onto the page using a scrunched up piece of tissue. That will in itself create some really interesting patterns and add some more areas of interest to your work. So you don't need to have paints to be able to create a really interesting background. So the last technique I'm going to show you is how you can use torn paper to create a really interesting background as well. It can be anything you have to hand. I've got some brown parcel wrapping paper here. I'm going to use some everyday lined paper that you might have in an old exercise book, and even old book pages, obviously not your best books, but just tear some edges. That in itself gives you some really interesting ways of laying the paper down. Just having that torn edge and building that up can give you a really nice background. I've chosen some similar colours for my background, quite earthy tones, so browns and the old vintage looking book pages. And you could even go over this afterwards when you've laid all the paper down with some tea or coffee if you wanted to give it that aged vintage look. That might be another idea. So torn papers, and that can be wrapping paper, tissue paper, books, magazines. Just see what you can create as an interesting background to work on.